I had always dreamed of living somewhere quiet, somewhere the air didn't taste like car exhaust and the nights weren't full of sirens. For years, I told myself that once I saved enough, I would leave the city behind. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, and avoided unnecessary expenses, just so one day I could wake up to the sound of wind instead of traffic. That dream started to take shape the morning I found a real estate listing titled, "Abandoned Mountain Property with Renovation Potential." The pictures were haunting but beautiful. A weathered wooden house stood on the side of a misty slope, surrounded by pine trees that looked older than time. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, and the windows were dusty, but there was something about it that pulled me in. It looked forgotten, and maybe that's why I wanted it so badly. The agent said it had been empty for nearly 10 years after the last owner passed away. No one wanted to take on the repairs or deal with the isolation. But that was exactly what I was looking for: peace, privacy, and a project that was mine alone. I signed the documents within a week. The process felt almost too easy, but I didn't question it. For the first time in years, I felt free. No neighbors complaining about noise, no association letters about lawn care or paint colors, and no surprise visits from anyone trying to check in. Just me, a quiet mountain, and a place to rebuild both the house and myself. When the day finally came to see my new property, I packed my truck with basic supplies, a sleeping bag, some tools, and enough food for a few days. The road leading up the mountain twisted through dense woods and narrow bridges. The higher I climbed, the quieter it became. My cell signal vanished about halfway up, but I didn't mind. I wanted to disconnect anyway. The house came into view at the turn of a dirt path lined with wildflowers and weeds. It stood taller than I expected, its stone chimney cracked but still holding strong. The porch creaked under my boots as I stepped onto it, a few leaves crunching beneath my feet. I could smell pine sap in the air mixed with something faintly metallic, maybe old nails or rust. Despite the state of disrepair, I felt proud. This was mine. But the excitement dimmed when I noticed the gate was open. I was sure I had seen it closed in the listing photos. Then I saw the mailbox. It was overflowing with envelopes and flyers, some faded and others new. My name wasn't on any of them. Most were addressed to current resident. That alone wasn't too strange, but what caught my attention were the muddy footprints on the porch leading to the door. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. Maybe it was an inspector, or maybe some kids had wandered in. Still, my hand shook slightly as I turned the knob. To my surprise, it opened easily. The hinges groaned like they hadn't been used in years, but the door didn't resist. Inside, the air was surprisingly warm. A faint smell of something like toast lingered. My heart skipped. Someone had been here recently. The living room looked oddly lived in, an empty mug on the table, a throw blanket draped over the couch, and a pair of sneakers by the stairs. My brain tried to make sense of it all. This was supposed to be abandoned. The agent said no one had stayed here for years. I took a cautious step forward, calling out a soft hello that barely carried through the silence. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard a sound from upstairs, footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I wasn't sure if I should leave or confront whoever was there. My rational side told me to back out and call someone, but another part of me, stubborn and curious, kept me rooted in place. "Who's there?" I asked, louder this time. The footsteps stopped, the silence stretched, thick and unnerving. I could hear the faint creak of the wooden floor above me. Then suddenly a voice called out, "Excuse me, what are you doing in my house?" I turned toward the staircase, my pulse pounding. A woman stood there, mid-40s maybe, with neatly combed hair and an expression of disbelief mixed with annoyance. Behind her, I caught sight of two teenagers peering down curiously from the railing. For a moment, I thought I had walked into the wrong house. But no, this was definitely the one. The key documents were in my truck, the address matched, and the deed had my name. Yet here she was, looking at me like I was the intruder. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I think there's been a mistake. I just bought this house." The woman crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes. "Bought," she said, her tone sharp. "That's funny because my family has been living here for months. Maybe you should check with the Mountain Association before making false claims." Mountain Association? I didn't even know what that was. As I stood there trying to understand what was happening, one thing became very clear. My peaceful mountain retreat had just turned into something else entirely. And whatever it wasn't going to be simple. I stood frozen near the doorway, still gripping my truck keys like they were a weapon. The woman on the staircase didn't look surprised to see me. She looked annoyed, as if I had interrupted her morning routine. Her two teenagers hovered behind her, whispering to each other like this was just another argument they had seen before. "I think there's been some confusion," I said carefully, trying to sound calm. This property was listed as abandoned. I bought it last month through the county sale. She gave a sharp laugh, the kind that didn't sound amused at all. Abandoned? We've lived here for nearly a year. Maybe you should check your paperwork before barging into someone's home. I blinked, unsure whether to argue or retreat. Her confidence made me hesitate. She looked like someone who always got the last word, and the smug tilt of her head told me she was used to having control. I have the deed, I insisted. It's in my truck, I can show you. She crossed her arms. Show it to the Mountain Association, she said. We've had people trying to claim property up here for months. The association handles everything now. The Mountain Association, I repeated, confused. You mean an HOA? She nodded proudly. That's right, we've kept this mountain in order after years of neglect. My husband and I took charge when no one else would. You can't just buy your way into this community without approval. I wanted to laugh. There was no HOA mentioned in any of the paperwork, no community guidelines, no membership dues. The listing had clearly stated no active association. Yet this woman, this self-appointed guardian, spoke as if she ran the mountain herself. Trying to de-escalate, I took a step back toward the door. Look, I said, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'll get the documents and we can figure this out, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Her expression softened just slightly, but her tone stayed sharp. Fine, do that, but don't expect us to leave. We've done too much work around here to be pushed out by some outsider with a piece of paper. Outsider? That word lingered in my mind as I backed out of the house and walked toward my truck. The cold air hit me hard, and I realized my hands were shaking, not from the temperature but from frustration. How could someone just move into a house that wasn't theirs and act like they owned it? I rummaged through the glove compartment, pulled out the folder with the title deed, and marched back to the porch. But when I reached the door, it was locked. I knocked once, then again, louder. No answer. Through the window, I saw the woman glance toward me, then turn away. She walked deeper into the house, ignoring me completely. I stood there for a few seconds, stunned. My house, my property, locked from the inside by people who didn't belong there. I could feel anger building, but I reminded myself that losing my temper wouldn't help. I drove back down the winding road to the nearest sheriff's office. The deputy at the desk listened politely, nodding as I explained what happened. When I finished, he sighed and said, "That sounds like a civil issue, sir. We can't remove anyone without a court order. If they claim residency, even temporary, you'll have to take it through legal channels." Residency, I repeated, they're trespassing. He shrugged. If they've been living there for months, it's more complicated. Get a lawyer. Bring your paperwork to the county office. The drive back up felt longer. My excitement from that morning had turned into a dull ache of disbelief. When I reached the property, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange behind the trees. My gate, which had been open before, was now closed with a sign hanging on it. Private property, Mountain Association members only. I stood there in silence, reading the words over and over. It wasn't even printed professionally, just bold black letters on white cardboard, but it made my stomach turn. They weren't just squatting, they were claiming ownership. I called the realtor that evening, explaining everything. She was shocked but admitted that she hadn't been to the property herself, only handled the sale remotely. It was listed through a county record update, she said. No one mentioned an active association. That's very unusual. Unusual was an understatement. It felt surreal, like I had stepped into some strange local power game. The next morning, I returned to the gate and found another note taped beside the sign. Unauthorized entry will result in penalties under Mountain HOA bylaws. Contact the board for permission. No contact number, no email, just that. That night I slept in my truck just down the road, too frustrated to drive back to town. The mountain was quiet except for the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional creak of wood from the house above. I could see a dim light flickering in the window, the same one I had dreamed of sitting beside, reading or working in peace. Now it was their light, their laughter echoed faintly through the night. I looked up at the dark silhouette of my house and made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't giving up. I had fought too hard to get here. Whatever this Mountain Association was, I would find out the truth. And once I did, they'd have no choice but to leave. The next morning, I woke up stiff from sleeping in the truck. My breath fogged up the windshield as I stared at the house above, sitting quietly under a blanket of mist. It looked peaceful from a distance, but I knew better now. Behind those curtains lived a family who had somehow decided that my purchase didn't count. I started the engine, letting the heater run while I sipped coffee from a thermos. My mind was already racing. If the local sheriff couldn't help, then I needed to understand who or what this mountain association really was. So after one last look at the locked gate, I headed into town. The county office was small, a one-story building with peeling paint and a flag that flapped lazily in the cold wind. Inside, an older woman behind the records desk looked up from her computer and smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," I said, laying the property documents on the counter. "I bought a house up on Ridgeview Mountain, but there's a family living inside. They're claiming there's some sort of mountain association that controls the area. Do you have any record of that?" Her brows furrowed. "Mountain Association," she typed quickly, scanning her monitor. After a moment, she frowned. "The only record we have is an old community charter from 1984. It dissolved in 1993. That area hasn't had an active association since then." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Because they've put up signs, rules, and they're calling themselves board members." She chuckled softly. "Then they must have made that up themselves. That land is privately owned. If your deed is valid, they have no authority there." Her calm tone gave me some relief, but I wasn't ready to celebrate. "Can I get a copy of that old charter?" I asked. "Of course," she said, printing a few faded pages. "You'll see the names of the last known members. Maybe that'll tell you something." I thanked her and sat in my truck reading through the yellowed documents. Most of the names meant nothing to me, retired couples, former residents, but one name caught my eye: Harold Morrison. The same last name as the woman currently living in my house. My heart skipped. Could she be related to him? Was she using his name to claim some kind of authority? It would explain the confidence, the fake rules, the locked doors. I drove back up the mountain determined to confront her, but when I reached the gate, I stopped. I didn't want another argument on her terms. I needed to be smart about this. So instead of marching to the door, I parked a few yards down the road and began walking through the trees toward the back of the property. The house loomed above me through the pines, its roof dark with age. As I crept closer, I could hear faint voices through the open window. The woman, Karen Morrison, as I'd later learn, was speaking to someone on the phone. "Yes, we're still here," she said firmly. "He came back again this morning. I told him to go through the association, but I doubt he will. These newcomers always think they can just take over." Her tone was full of irritation, but what caught my attention was her next line. "Don't worry, I have the original documents. They can't prove anything." Original documents. That meant she had something from the old HOA, probably that 1984 charter I had just read about. My pulse quickened. If she had those, she might actually believe she was in charge of the property. I slipped away quietly before she noticed me and headed back to the truck. I needed evidence, something solid I could use to show the sheriff or the court that this association was fake. So I decided to visit the local historical society, a small office attached to the town library. The volunteer there, a friendly man named Mark, recognized the name right away. "Ah, the Ridgeview Mountain Association," he said, pulling out a dusty binder. "They fell apart decades ago, too many disagreements. Some folks kept meeting for a while informally, but it was never reinstated." "Did anyone named Morrison stay involved?" I asked. He nodded. "Old Harold Morrison was the last president before it disbanded. He lived in that mountain house, actually. After he passed, the place sat empty for years." So that was it. The woman must have been Harold's daughter or niece, and she must have decided that her family's history gave her ownership of the house. But history didn't equal legal rights. I thanked Mark and left with copies of the records. The evidence was clear: no active HOA, no legal claim. Yet something told me that walking up to her door with papers wouldn't fix this. People like her didn't back down because of paperwork. By the time I reached the property again, evening shadows stretched across the road. The lights inside the house were on, flickering softly through the windows. I parked at a distance, watching quietly. Then I noticed something new, a small wooden sign nailed to a tree near the gate. It read, "Mountain HOA meeting tonight, members only." I stared at it, half in disbelief, half in anger. They weren't just pretending to be residents, they were building a whole fake community. I didn't know how far this game went, but I was determined to find out. Because if they thought they could rewrite history to keep my house, they were about to learn that I wasn't leaving without a fight. By the next morning, my patience had officially run out. The fake signs, the arrogance, the way they had twisted a 30-year-old association into a shield, it all burned inside me like a slow fire. I decided that if this battle had turned into paperwork, I would fight it on paper. The first stop was the county legal office, where I filed a formal notice of ownership and requested that law enforcement verify my purchase record. The clerk, a young man who looked half asleep, barely glanced at the documents before saying, "Yeah, this is all valid. You've got a clean title. Whoever's living there has no legal right." That gave me a small sense of relief, but I knew it wasn't enough. The Morrisons weren't the type to quietly admit defeat. They had already built a fake world of rules and authority, and now they were living inside it. I had to gather proof that could be used in court if it came to that. I drove back up the winding road, this time carrying a folder full of stamped documents. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. The forest around me seemed darker, the trees closing in like silent witnesses. When I reached the gate, my heart sank again. The sign had changed. Now it read, "No trespassing, HOA Board Order 27. I almost laughed. They were inventing rule numbers now. I parked the truck and approached the gate anyway. "Karen," I shouted, "we need to talk." For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then the front door creaked open, and she appeared on the porch, wearing a heavy sweater and holding a clipboard like she was conducting official business. "I told you already," she said loudly. "You're not allowed on association property without clearance." "This is my property," I said firmly, holding up the folder. "I have the deed, the title, and legal proof. The county confirmed it this morning." She raised an eyebrow, pretending not to be impressed. "Paperwork doesn't mean much up here. We have our own system." "That system doesn't exist," I said. "Your association was dissolved in the 90s. I've seen the records." Her expression faltered for the first time, then quickly she forced a smile. "You can believe whatever you want, but as long as we're living here, this mountain follows our rules. If you try to enter again, I'll file a report." "With who?" I asked. "Your imaginary board." Her face hardened. "With local enforcement, we have connections." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just stubbornness. It was control. She genuinely believed she was right, or at least wanted to make me believe she was. The more she acted confident, the harder it became to tell whether she was bluffing or not. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the gate. "You're trespassing, and you know it. I'm giving you a chance to leave peacefully before I take this further." She smirked, good luck proving it. Then she turned and walked back inside, closing the door with slow finality. That night I sat in my truck again, going over the documents by flashlight. The wind howled through the trees, shaking the branches like something alive. I could see faint light coming from the living room window. They were still there, warm and comfortable, living in a house that was rightfully mine. I made a decision then. I would not argue with her again. The next step was court. Over the next few days, I met with a local attorney, a quiet but sharp man named Reed. After reading through the papers and hearing the story, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I've seen a lot of strange property disputes, but this one takes the cake. Don't worry though, if your paperwork is clean, this will be an easy win." Easy win or not, it would take time. Reed filed a formal eviction notice and we scheduled a court date for 2 weeks later. Until then, all I could do was wait. But waiting on that mountain wasn't easy. Every time I visited, something new appeared: a neighborhood watch sign, a speed limit 10 marker, even a mailbox labeled Mountain HOA Board Office. They were building a fiction piece by piece right in front of me. The last straw came one evening when I found a handwritten notice taped to my truck window. "You are in violation of Mountain Association Code 3B, unauthorized loitering. Fines will be added to your record." They were trying to find me now. I crumpled the note in my fist and stared at the dark shape of the house in the distance. The light in the upstairs window flickered, and I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving, maybe hers, maybe one of the teenagers. For the first time since I bought the house, I felt something deeper than anger. It was the realization that this wasn't just about property anymore. This was about pride, territory, and power. She had turned my peaceful retreat into a battlefield of paperwork and intimidation. But she had underestimated one thing. I wasn't leaving, and I wasn't afraid of her made-up laws. If she wanted a paper war, she was about to get one, and I intended to win every round. The following week dragged on like a slow storm that refused to pass. My lawyer had already filed the eviction papers, but Karen Morrison acted as though none of it mattered. Each time I drove up the mountain, there was a new sign, a new threat, or some ridiculous notice pinned to the gate. It almost felt like a game to her, a battle of nerves, and she was convinced I'd be the first to blink. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just sitting idle. I'd started digging into every possible record I could find, hoping to uncover something that would expose her fake authority once and for all. One morning, I stopped by the local hardware store to pick up supplies when an older man at the counter struck up a conversation. "You the new owner of the Ridgeview place?" he asked casually. I nodded cautiously, trying to be wise. He chuckled. "I figured. Word travels fast around here. That woman up there, she's been telling folks the house belongs to her family association. Said you're some kind of developer trying to take over the mountain." I sighed. That's not even close to the truth. He leaned in a little. "You didn't hear this from me, but she's been playing that role for years. Every time someone buys land near her, she tries to scare them off with her so-called mountain association. Claims she's protecting the heritage of the ridge. Most people just give up because it's too much hassle." That explained why the property sat empty for so long. It wasn't just remote, it was guarded by her imaginary empire. Before I left, the man added something that made me pause. "If you really want to beat her, find that old HOA binder she carries around. Locals say she keeps it locked in a cabinet, calls it the rule book. That's what she uses to justify everything." The rule book. The moment I heard it, I knew that was the key. That afternoon, I drove up the mountain again, stopping a short distance from the property. The house looked quiet. Smoke rose from the chimney and the faint smell of burning pine drifted through the air. I watched for a while, waiting for movement. Around noon, I saw their car pull out of the driveway and head down the road, probably toward town. It was risky, but I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. I climbed through the backwoods, careful to stay quiet. The back door was locked, but one of the side windows wasn't fully shut. I slid it open just enough to climb through. Inside, the air was still warm, with a faint scent of coffee and detergent. Everything looked perfectly arranged, as if they took pride in their fake ownership. I moved quickly, checking the living room first, nothing but neatly stacked magazines and an old radio. Then I headed toward the small office space off the hall. That's where I found it. A thick, dusty binder sat on a shelf behind the desk, its spine labeled in faded gold letters, Mountain Ridge Association Records. My pulse quickened. I flipped it open carefully, and there it was, a collection of yellowed papers, typed notes, and meeting minutes dating back to the 1980s. Most were harmless, attendance sheets, old budgets, but tucked in the back was something new. Handwritten pages, fresh ink, and on top of them the name Karen Morrison, acting president. I scanned through her notes and my jaw tightened. She had rewritten sections of the defunct HOA's bylaws to make it sound like she had real authority. She'd even stamped them with an imitation seal that looked almost official. To anyone unfamiliar with local records, it would look legitimate. I took photos of every page, every detail. As I worked, I found one more thing, a list of names and contact numbers titled Active Members. I recognized a few last names from mailboxes around the mountain. Apparently, she had recruited some of the neighbors to support her association, probably using the same intimidation tactics. Just as I slipped the binder back onto the shelf, I heard a car door slam outside. My heart raced. They were back early. I ducked behind the desk, holding my breath as the front door opened. "I told you we needed more firewood," Karen's voice called out, irritated. "And don't forget to lock the gate this time." I waited until their footsteps faded into another room before easing back toward the window. Every sound seemed louder than it should, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of my jacket. I managed to slip out and jog quietly back through the trees until I reached my truck. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I finally had proofs. That night, I sat in my motel room, organizing the photos on my laptop. Page after page of forged documents, rewritten rules, and fake membership lists. It was more than enough to prove that her association was nothing but a personal invention. I emailed everything to Reed, my lawyer, and within minutes he called me back. "This is perfect," he said. "You just gave us the evidence we need. Once the judge sees this, they'll have no choice but to evict them." For the first time since buying the house, I felt a glimmer of hope. The battle wasn't over yet, but I finally had the upper hand. As I closed my laptop, a soft rumble of thunder rolled through the mountains. Rain began tapping against the window, steady and cold. I leaned back in the chair, exhausted but satisfied. Then, just before I turned off the light, I glanced outside and froze. A pair of headlights was parked just down the road. The engine was running, but no one stepped out. They were watching. And suddenly I realized Karen might already know what I had done. The next morning the rain hadn't stopped. The sky was a dull gray and the mountain road shimmered with puddles. I barely slept that night after seeing those headlights outside my window. They never moved, and by the time I finally gathered the courage to look again, the car was gone. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. By sunrise, I was done waiting. My lawyer, Reed, had already filed for an expedited hearing, and the county judge approved an inspection order to confirm illegal occupation. It meant that I could finally bring a deputy with me. I wasn't going alone this time. The drive up the mountain felt different. This time I wasn't arriving as a confused new owner or a frustrated buyer. I was coming to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The deputy riding with me, a calm man named Harlan, didn't say much during the trip. He just stared out the window and said, "People like that don't usually go quietly, just keep your cool." When we reached the gate, the familiar signs were still there, though some were soaked and peeling from the rain. The wooden one that read Mountain HOA members only hung crookedly, as if the mountain itself was tired of the charade. I took a deep breath. "Ready?" I asked. Harlan nodded and unlatched the gate, swinging it open. The sound echoed sharply through the quiet morning. The front door opened almost immediately. Karen stepped out, holding an umbrella and wearing that same air of authority she always carried, as if this entire mountain was her kingdom. Her husband appeared behind her, phone in hand, already recording. "Excuse me," she said loudly, "this is private property. You can't just walk in here." Harlan showed his badge. "Ma'am, this man owns the property. We have the documents and a court order verifying it. You've been living here without authorization." She scoffed. "Oh, please, that's what he told you, but we have a community charter. The Mountain Association governs this area and we're in good standing." I stepped forward, holding up my phone. "You mean this?" I said, pulling up the photos of her fake rulebook. "Because I found your binder, the one full of forged bylaws and fake signatures. You even made up an official seal, Karen." Her expression flickered for just a second, enough for me to see the crack in her confidence. Then she forced a smile. "Those aren't fake, those are historical documents. My father founded this association and I have every right to protect it." Harlan's voice stayed steady. "Ma'am, the county has confirmed the association was dissolved decades ago. You and your family need to vacate immediately." Her husband finally lowered the phone. "You can't kick us out," he muttered. "We've taken care of this place for years. We cleaned it up, fixed the roof." "With materials you didn't buy," I interrupted. "You've been living rent-free on property that doesn't belong to you." Karen's tone sharpened. "You don't understand. Without us, this place would have fallen apart. The mountain needs order. Someone has to make sure people like you don't destroy it." The irony nearly made me laugh. "People like me? You mean actual owners?" The rain picked up, pattering against the umbrellas and the porch roof. Harlan took a step forward. "Ma'am, I'm giving you one last chance to leave peacefully. If you refuse, we'll have to escort you off the premises." For a moment, the world seemed to go quiet. Karen's jaw tightened, and I could see the conflict in her eyes, defiance fighting with reality. Finally, she turned sharply toward her husband. "Pack the car," she said. "We'll be back once this is straightened out." They disappeared inside, slamming the door. A few minutes later, the two teenagers came out carrying boxes, muttering under their breath. Karen followed behind them, clutching a stack of papers to her chest like a shield. She didn't look at me as they loaded the car. When she finally got in the driver's seat, she rolled the window down halfway and glared at me. "You may have your papers," she said, "but you don't understand this place. The mountain doesn't forget who it belongs to." Then she drove off, the sound of tires crunching over gravel fading into the mist. Harlan turned to me and exhaled. "Well," he said, "that's one for the record books." I laughed softly, though it came out more as a sigh. "I'll believe it when I see them gone for good." We walked through the house together to ensure it was empty. Inside, the air was still and heavy. Their things were gone, but traces of them lingered, half-burned candles on the table, a pile of old mail, a cracked photo frame left behind on a shelf. The place was dusty and scarred, but it was mine again. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the rough texture beneath my fingers. After weeks of conflict, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. When Harlan left, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the rain fade into a soft drizzle. For the first time since I'd arrived, the mountain was silent. No shouts, no threats, no footsteps inside, just quiet. But as I looked out toward the tree line, something caught my eye, a small sign half buried in the mud. I walked over and pulled it free. The wood was worn, the letters barely visible, but I could still read them. Property protected by Mountain HOA. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or shiver. Because even though they were gone, something about that warning didn't feel finished. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen meant every word she'd said when she drove away. The first few days after Karen and her family left were quiet, too quiet. I thought peace would feel comforting, but instead, the silence pressed against me like a weight I couldn't escape. Every creak of the wooden floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows made me pause and listen. Still, I tried to settle in. I spent mornings cleaning up what they'd left behind, piles of broken trinkets, boxes of expired food, and random stacks of papers covered in half-finished meeting notes from her fake HOA. By evening, I'd light the fireplace and tell myself this was finally home. But the house didn't quite believe it yet, and neither did I. One night while I was unpacking the last of my boxes, I noticed something odd, a faint light flickering outside through the rain-smeared window. I stepped closer and saw what looked like a lantern swaying near the tree line. For a moment, I thought it was my reflection, but then it moved, side to side, slow and deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. "Hello," I called. "Who's there?" No answer, just the wind rustling through the trees. The light vanished a second later, swallowed by the dark. I stayed awake for hours after that, watching through the window, but nothing returned. The next morning, I told myself it was probably some hiker or a camper passing through. The mountain wasn't private land beyond my property, and people wandered sometimes. Still, when I walked down to check the area, I found boot prints, 2 sets of them, pressed deep into the mud, heading straight toward my fence before veering off into the woods. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to sound paranoid. By the weekend, I was beginning to relax again. I even started painting the guest room when I heard the sound, metal scraping against metal. It came from outside near the gate. I set the paint roller down and went to look. The gate that Harlan had unlatched a week earlier was now locked again, with a new chain and padlock. And hanging from it was a fresh wooden sign, crudely carved but unmistakable. "No trespassing, private HOA property." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. That night I called Harlan. "I think they've been back," I told him. He sighed on the other end. "You got proof?" "I've got a sign and a new lock." "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "Don't go looking for them alone. People like that, they don't like losing control." I barely slept that night. The rain returned around midnight, tapping steadily against the roof. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I checked, there was nothing, just the empty rocking chair moving slightly from the wind. The next day, Harlan drove up in his patrol truck. When I showed him the gate, his brow furrowed. "That's definitely new," he said. "You didn't put that there, right?" "Of course not." He cut the chain and took the sign as evidence. "I'll file a report," he said, "but unless we catch them in the act, there's not much we can do." He suggested I install security cameras. I agreed immediately. By evening, I had motion lights up and a small camera facing the driveway. For the first time, I felt a bit of relief. Technology, at least, couldn't be intimidated by a fake rulebook. But that peace didn't last long. 2 nights later, I got a notification on my phone. The camera had detected movement. My heart pounded as I opened the feed. At first, it was nothing but fog. Then through the mist, I saw them. Karen, her husband, and behind them the 2 teenagers. They were standing just beyond the driveway, staring directly at the camera. Karen was holding something in her hands, papers, probably that same binder. Her lips moved like she was speaking, though I couldn't hear her over the static. Then her husband stepped forward and taped something to my fence. They turned and walked back into the woods without another glance. I waited until sunrise before going outside. The air was cold and dew clung to the grass. On the fence was a single sheet of paper sealed in a plastic sleeve. It was a notice of reinstatement, signed by Karen Morrison, president of the Mountain Ridge Homeowners Association. The date was yesterday. I laughed out loud, though it came out more like disbelief than amusement. "She's unbelievable," I muttered. But then I noticed something written in red ink at the bottom of the page, a message that wasn't on any of her usual forms. "You can't evict what belongs to the mountains." That night, I locked every door and window. I left the lights on and kept my phone beside me. And even though I told myself it was over, I couldn't stop glancing out the window toward the dark tree line. Because somewhere out there in the cold and fog, I knew Karen was still watching. And deep down, I had a terrifying feeling that this wasn't about property anymore. It was personal. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't keep living in fear. The notice taped to my fence wasn't just another bluff, it was a message. Karen wanted me to know she hadn't given up, that she still believed the mountain was hers. But this time, I wasn't going to wait for her to make the next move. I called Reed, my lawyer, and told him everything. "She's back," I said. "Her whole family was here last night. I caught them on camera." Reed sighed. "You've got solid proof now. I'll have the sheriff issue a restraining order, but listen, don't confront her directly. Let the law handle it." I promised I'd stay put, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't. This wasn't about paperwork anymore. It was about peace. I couldn't keep rebuilding my life while she stalked the edges of it like a ghost. That evening, just before sunset, I drove down to the bottom of the mountain to clear my head. The sky was fading to a soft gold and mist rolled between the trees. On the way back, I noticed something strange. The padlock Harlan had cut off the gate was back, brand new and gleaming. And this time the wooden sign didn't say, "Private HOA property." It said, "Meeting tonight, members required." I parked the truck, heart pounding. Against my better judgment, I stepped out and followed the faint light flickering deeper in the woods. The trail wound between thick pines until it opened into a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood a circle of old wooden chairs, some broken, some freshly painted. A lantern burned in the middle, its glow dancing across a stack of papers on a tree stump. And there she was. Karen Morrison sat at the head of the circle, wearing her pink jacket and holding that infamous binder in her lap. Her husband and kids were beside her, quiet and still. When she looked up and saw me, she smiled, not the smug grin I'd seen before, but something tired and oddly calm. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. "What are you doing here, Karen? You're trespassing again." She ignored that. "You don't get it, do you? This place needs someone to take care of it. The ridge was dying before we came. No one remembered the old rules. No one respected the land." I took a step closer, rain beginning to fall in thin, cold drops. "You made those rules up. You forged every page in that binder." Her fingers tightened around it. "Maybe I rewrote them, maybe I fixed them, but somebody had to. Without order, this mountain turns on people. It always has." Her husband shifted uneasily, whispering, "Karen, maybe we should just go." She snapped, "No, not until he understands." Then she looked back at me. "You think you can just buy this place and own it? Money doesn't make it yours. You don't know what happened here before. You don't know what this mountain remembers." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "You heard it too, didn't you? The sounds at night, the wind that doesn't sound like wind." For a second I hesitated, because she wasn't wrong. I had heard things. Whispers in the trees, footsteps on the porch, and once faint voices carried by the fog when I thought I was alone. But I shook my head. "That's not the mountain, Karen, that's you. You're keeping this place haunted." She stared at me for a long time, eyes glinting in the lantern light. Then slowly she closed the binder and set it on the stump. "Maybe it's both," she said quietly. I stepped forward, took the binder and tucked it under my arm. "This ends tonight." Her husband stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Karen, please let it go." She looked around at her family, then at the trees swaying behind me, and for the first time I saw something in her expression that wasn't anger, it was loss. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone," she murmured. "We just wanted to belong somewhere." I didn't know what to say. The rain was falling harder now, hissing against the leaves. Finally she turned away. "We'll leave," she said softly, "for good this time." I didn't follow them as they walked into the darkness. I stood in that clearing until their lantern light disappeared completely, leaving only the steady drum of rain and the faint creak of the trees. When I finally made it back to the house, I set the binder on the porch and opened it one last time. The pages were smeared with rain, the ink running like tears. Near the back, I found a section titled Founding Members. There were half a dozen names written there, none of them Karen's. But one name caught my eye, the last entry. Property owner Morrison, 1987. The same last name. That night I sat by the fire, the binder resting beside me. Maybe her family really had once owned this land. Maybe that was why she clung to it so fiercely. I'd probably never know for sure. What I did know was that the mountain was finally quiet again. Days turned into weeks and no more signs appeared. The cameras stayed silent. The forest settled back into peace. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I stepped onto the porch, looked out at the endless trees, and finally said aloud, "It's over." But when the wind swept through the pines, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper, soft, distant, almost like a voice carried through time. "Take care of the mountains." I smiled faintly and whispered back, "I will." And for the first time since I'd bought that old house, I truly felt like it was home. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.